Oh, hello and welcome back to Freedom Free For All. I'm Paul, the creative director here. So, the census. Did you receive this document in the mail? I'm sure you did. They make sure everybody gets it. With all Canadians recently receiving that new long form census in the mail, which says right here that it's the law that you have to participate, the question is how much do you have to participate in this survey? What I really like, it says on the back here, it says, by law, your responses will be kept confidential. Yeah, by Lockheed Martin, they'll keep it totally confidential. Yeah. So, my question is, what if you're giving away valuable information, private information, under the presumption that it's mandatory, as it says? What parts of the census are actually mandatory and what parts of the census are voluntary? You see, every piece of legislation government creates, it must protect your inherent common law rights. Otherwise, that piece of legislation would mean that you're a slave. They give you a little back door in most pieces of legislation, though, but you have to know how to read it. But if you don't know how to read it, if you don't know how to read the legislation or understand the limitations of government, you'll never know. So the first piece of information I'm going to give you here is from Matthew Bacon. He's from the New Abridgment of Law, Volume 1, 1832, page 116. He writes, "It is the unalienable right of the people to pursue their own happiness. The true object of government is to secure them this right. The happiness of the people is the happiness of the individuals who comprise the mass." So I'm going to breeze through this information with you because it is quite complex. However, so what I'm going to ask you to do is get a pen and paper. You're going to have to review this video a couple times. You're going to have to print off the Act or look at the Act. It's not a very long Act. It's actually quite short. You're going to have to review that section of it. Take the time to do this because it's well worth your investment. You'll learn a lot and you'll understand how sometimes, most of the time, there's deception involved when you're afraid. So, where do we start? That's the first question. Where do we start with this whole game? First, let's go to the StatsCan website and look under the Frequently Asked Questions tab to see if we even have to participate. So there's a link there that says, do I participate? You click that link and it says, participation in the census of population and the census of agriculture is mandatory pursuant to the Statistics Act. All Canadian households must complete a census of population questionnaire. All farm operators are required to complete the census of agriculture questionnaire. If Statistics Canada contacts you for a labor force survey, business survey, or agriculture survey, you are also obligated to participate, here's the word, pursuant to the Statistics Act. Finally, it says, for other Statistics Canada surveys, participation is voluntary. So in this little document made on their own website, we now know what is mandatory, population and agriculture. But they don't necessarily tell us what is voluntary. So, where do we go now? Well, let's go to the Statistics Act itself. Let's go to the table of contents. This is the table of contents that you're looking at here. It's pretty short. What you need to look at is the items that are marked in red. The areas that are marked in red are what you will need to understand. They're applicable to you and only to you. So, that's the table of contents. Let's go straight to Section 3 of this Act. Section 3 is pretty straightforward. Section 3 is the summary of what this whole Act talks about. So the Act is the expanded part of the summary. So let's read it quickly. Section 3, there shall continue to be a Statistics Bureau under the Minister known as the Statistics Canada. The duties are A, to compile, collect, analyze, abstract, publish statistical information on the relating blah blah blah. B, to collaborate with government departments in the collection, compilation, publication, statistical information, blah 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 blah. Here it is, 3C, to take the census of population and the census of agriculture as provided in this Act. That's the key part you want to look at. D, to promote the avoidance of duplication of information collected by government departments. And E, generally to promote the social integrated, social, economic, statistical pertaining to the whole of Canada, blah, 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 blah. So that is the whole section. That is the summary of the duties and the jurisdiction that the minister has in this Act. It's very important to understand that. Most of these acts say in this Act, not in Canada or in the world. So, that's the first part you need to take a look at. And again, if we go back to that do I have to participate tab, it clearly identifies census of population and census of agriculture is mandatory. And there it says it right there, to take the census of population and agriculture. So let's flip to Section 8. under the same heading, Statistics Canada. This title is called Voluntary Surveys. So the question is what's voluntary? Well, let's read it. Here we go. The minister may, by order, authorize the obtaining for a particular purpose of information other than information for census of population or agriculture on a voluntary basis, but where such information is requested, Section 31 does not apply in respect to refusal or neglect to furnish the information. Let's break that down and just look at that in plain and ordinary language. The minister may authorize the obtaining of information other than census of population and agriculture. Why? Because it's already laid out in Section 3C that they have to take it on a voluntary basis, but where such information is requested, Section 31 does not apply. Hold on a sec here. What's Section 31? This is how you kind of read acts. You got to jump back and forth to understand what they're talking about. Let's jump quickly to Section 31. Section 31 of the Act is under the offenses and punishment part of the Act. Section 31 states, every person who, without lawful excuse, and then there's an A and a B. They basically say who refuses to or neglects to answer the questions that are requisite for the obtaining of the information sought within the object of the Act. And the Part B, 31B, says the same thing. Anyone who refuses or neglects to furnish information to the best of their knowledge and belief who has been required to fill in pursuant to the Act is liable to offense, a summary conviction not exceeding $500 imprisonment. So what are they really saying here? Back to Section 8. They're saying that any other question other than population and agriculture, the minister may request on a voluntary basis. And if you apply Section 31, with your lawful excuse, called common law private rights, you don't have to answer those questions, and therefore you're not held liable. That's what that wrapped up as a whole means. It's very complicated when you just read it from the get-go. So it protects your private rights, this Section 31. What else does it do? Or what is your lawful excuse? The lawful excuse is that those other questions are not required within the Act. They're just simply not required. The minister is required to ask those questions, but you, as an individual, are not required to answer them. They're based on a voluntary basis. That's what it is, except for population and agriculture. Within the Act, it says you must do that. So the question now is, what is required in the Act, and how do we know this? Let's jump to Section 19. Section 19, actually, quickly, Section 15 under presumption. Read that one when you have a second. It's very interesting. They basically say it's a presumption that all data that's collected is done lawfully. Check that out, Section 15. So Section 19.1, under population, census, and agriculture, it says, 19.1, a census of population of Canada shall be taken. Shall is imperative. If you go to the Federal Interpretation Act, it talks about the words imperative versus permissive. Taken is a very dominating word versus collect, compile, very fruity, light words, right? So 19.1 says a census of population shall be taken, which goes into what we talked about in this do I have to participate. Yes, you do. It says right there, census of population is mandatory pursuant to the Act. Section 19.2 says this, and this is an important part to understand. The census of population shall be taken in such a manner to ensure that the counts of population, it doesn't say the genders of the population, it doesn't say the colors of the eyes of the population, it doesn't say the rooms in which the counts of the populations exist. It's a numerical evaluation. So here we have the counts of the population. We now know that population is mandatory. Let's jump to Section 20, the next one, the agriculture census. It says, a census of agriculture of Canada shall be taken. There's that again, shall be taken. Not requested, but be taken in the years 1971, in the years 1976, and so forth. So here we see Section 19 and Section 20 of this Act, confirmed by Section 3, which is the summary, 3C, telling us that we need population and agriculture as a mandatory question. And that goes back to the facts question, do I have to participate? Well, we still haven't figured out what is voluntary. Well, let's go to Section 22. Section 22 is what they call the general statistics. Now, these are the general statistics in which Section 8 identifies as any other question other than census of population and agriculture on a voluntary basis. Key, always remember that. So Section 22, General Statistics, says, without limiting the duties of Stats Canada under Section 3, which is the summary, otherwise authorized or required under this Act, the Chief Statistician shall, there's that word imperative, shall, under the direction of the Minister, collect, compile, abstract, not take, but collect, compile, abstract, publish statistical information to any or all of the matters. A is population. Oh, there's population, Section 19.1. Agriculture. Oh, there's agriculture, Section 20. But then it goes into healthcare, welfare, law enforcement, immigration, education, prices, manufacturing, construction, public and administration. So what they've done here is they've put in what is mandatory in with the voluntary to make it look like you've got to do all of that. So the question is how do I know this? How is Paul right? How does Paul know that those are the voluntary ones? Well, I can go to the Section 3A, or 3 again. It's really important to understand this. Legislators don't just write stuff for the hell of it. And they don't omit stuff because they don't have enough ink in the printer. They don't do that. They do it with precision, and it goes through a whole form in which it has to get passed. So in Section 3A, they said to collect, compile, and abstract all this information. But then in Part 3C, they say to take the population of Canada. Now, if it was the same thing, why wouldn't they just put it under the same line? It's because they're different. One is voluntary, one is mandatory. Why would they make Section 19 and 20 separate from Section 22? Because they're different. There is an interesting man named Pierre-André Cote. You might want to Google him. He wrote a book called The Interpretation of Legislation in Canada, second edition, 1991. At page 231, he gives a quote, and he says, "Since the judge's task is to interpret the statute, not create it, as a general rule, interpretation should not add to the terms of the law. Legislation is deemed to be well drafted and to express completely what the legislator wanted to say." So again, why would they separate all of these things? Why would they go back to the facts question? Why would they let you know that the census of population and agriculture is mandatory pursuant to the Act, Section 19 and 20, or A or 3C, and everything else is voluntary? Why would they do that? Why would they put in your lawful excuse? Why wouldn't they just say anybody who doesn't comply is done like dinner? Go to Guantanamo, you're done. Why do they do that? Because they have to protect our private inherent common law rights. But we don't know this because we've never been educated this. Lastly, I want to finish with Section 30. Section 30 is the offense and punishment part of this Act. Now, if you don't answer all the questions, if someone comes to your door and you don't answer all the questions, they're going to start scaring you and say, oh, Section 31 says that you'll go to jail forever in Guantanamo if you don't say it, right? Well, you know your lawful excuse now. You know Section 8, which is your voluntary implications. Well, Section 30 is designed for the agent. It says this: every person who, after taking oath set out in subsection 6.1, 6.1 doesn't apply to you because you're not the agent, but I'll let you know every agent has to take an oath when they do this. Every person who, after taking the oath, deserts from his duty or willfully makes a false declaration or statement in return of the blah, 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 is guilty of summary conviction or fine. So if you stay silent and you answer those two questions, population count and agriculture, and they go ahead and fill it in because their boss told them that it won't work unless it's all filled in, you can point to them and say they're liable for summary conviction of exceeding not $1,000 and up to 6 months in jail. Do you know that? And they'll shit their pants. Because they have never read this Act. They don't know your rights, and most people don't know their rights. But when you read these pieces of legislation, you figure it out real fast. Section 31 is your lawful excuse. Keep that in mind. So, to wrap this up, to wrap it all up, do you have to participate in it? You do. But what parts are voluntary and what parts are mandatory? That is up to you to exercise. That is up to you to exercise your rights and wipe away the fear. Buy a Black's Law Dictionary, Google the word take, compile, understand what those words mean, get a Canadian Law Dictionary, stand your ground, and stand for what everybody else stands for, or fall, just like everybody's falling. When you get this form in the mail, you don't have to fill it out. Because when you go online, they don't give you an option to not answer the questions. That's how stealth they are. It's their job to collect the information, not your job to give it to them. Call this number on the back, or wherever it is, and ask them to send you a written one. They will send you a written one because they have to. Fill in the areas that you feel that is lawful. When you're done, send it in. And there you go. You've exercised your rights, and you've followed the rule of law with power. And this is how we can change the world. Not only in the Statistics Act, but in almost every other act. But be careful. They've got a system that will hurt you if you don't be careful. So, that's my section. If you got any questions, comments at Freedom Free for All, you think I'm crazy, you think I'm wrong, send me the information, let me know. I'm open to it. I've been wrong many times before, and I'm okay with it. When we come back from this little segment, or this little commercial, this commercial is very interesting. It's going to be talking about transhumanism. It's going to be talking about what the social engineers want to create for our society. But they're not going to with smart individuals like you and I. We're going to come back to the round table. We're going to have Glenn Ramke soon. He's a very bright individual. We're going to be talking about transhumanism. And I look forward to talking more with you there. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.